Nobody expected a routine legal battle to turn into a nationwide showdown between Karoline Leavitt and one of the most powerful judges in the system. She had been warned. They told her she didn't stand a chance, that the courtroom was rigged, that the system wasn't built for someone like her to win, that Judge Robert Calloway wasn't just a judge. He was a gatekeeper, someone who had spent decades ensuring that only the right people won cases in his courtroom. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't one of the right people. And Calloway, he was about to make that very clear. Karoline walked into the marble-floored federal courthouse, her expression calm but unreadable, dressed in a sleek black blazer, a white blouse, and heels that clicked with purpose against the polished floors. The air was thick with tension, reporters whispering among themselves, cameras flashing as she strode past the press pool. Inside the courtroom, the energy was even heavier. Judge Calloway was already seated behind his imposing wooden bench, his gray hair neatly combed back, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. Karoline didn't flinch. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her legal team beside her. Across the aisle sat the opposition, the ones who thought they had already won. Judge Calloway cleared his throat, tapping his gavel once. "This court is now in session." His voice was deep, authoritative, a voice that had delivered thousands of verdicts, many of which had left the wrong people in ruins. Karoline folded her hands together, waiting. The case itself wasn't controversial, or at least it shouldn't have been. A straightforward challenge to a blatantly corrupt government contract, one that favored political insiders over taxpayers. But because Karoline was the one leading the charge, the opposition had turned it into something else, a political war. And Calloway, he had no intention of letting her walk out of this courtroom with a victory. Karoline's attorney, Daniel Brooks, rose from his seat. "Your Honor, we would like to proceed with the presentation of evidence regarding..." Judge Calloway lifted a hand. His expression was blank, almost bored. "No need, Mr. Brooks." Karoline narrowed her eyes. Brooks hesitated. "Excuse me, Your Honor." Calloway leaned forward slightly, fingers tapping against his desk. "This case," he said slowly, "is a waste of the court's time." A murmur rippled through the room. Karoline didn't move. Brooks cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is a legally sound challenge to a government contract that..." Calloway exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Ms. Leavitt has a habit of bringing forward politically motivated cases, and frankly, I'm not interested in entertaining them." A low chuckle came from the defense's table. Karoline's grip on the edge of the desk tightened. Brooks kept his composure. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this case is about taxpayer fraud, not politics." Calloway leaned back in his chair, staring at Karoline now. "Is that so?" he mused. "Then tell me, Ms. Leavitt, if this case isn't about politics, why is it that every time you walk into a courtroom, the media is conveniently waiting outside?" A few reporters in the back shifted uncomfortably. Karoline's face remained unreadable, because she knew exactly what this was. This wasn't about the case. This was about sending a message. To her, to anyone who thought they could challenge the system and win. She had seen it happen before. Cases thrown out on technicalities, evidence dismissed without cause, judges playing politics instead of enforcing the law. And now, it was happening to her. Brooks was still speaking, trying to keep the case on track, but Karoline wasn't listening anymore. She was watching Calloway, watching the arrogance in his expression. The way he sat back like this was all just a formality, like he had already decided the outcome before she even walked into the room. He thought he had won, but Calloway had underestimated one thing. Karoline Leavitt didn't back down. She took a slow breath, then stood up. The room went silent. Even Calloway paused, caught off guard by her sudden movement. "Your Honor," Karoline said, her voice calm but firm, "are you dismissing this case before hearing a single piece of evidence?" Calloway's lips twitched, annoyed that she had called him out. "This court does not exist to provide a stage for political stunts," he said coolly. Karoline nodded slowly. "I agree." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "This court is supposed to be about the law," she continued, her tone unwavering. "Which is why I'd like to remind Your Honor that under judicial ethics rules, a judge is obligated to remain impartial, regardless of who is sitting at this table." A low murmur ran through the room. Karoline didn't blink. If Your Honor would prefer not to review the evidence, she added, then I'd like it noted for the record that this court is knowingly obstructing due process. Calloway's jaw tightened, and for the first time that morning, he hesitated, because Karoline had just done something dangerous. She had forced him into a corner, publicly. He could dismiss the case, yes. But now? Now people were watching. Calloway's fingers curled around the edge of his desk. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, frustration, and just the smallest hint of doubt. Karoline knew she had hit a nerve, but this fight wasn't over, not even close. Because the moment she walked out of this courtroom, she was going to make sure the whole country saw exactly what had just happened, and Calloway wasn't going to like what happened next. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Calloway sat behind his bench, his fingers tightening around his gavel, his jaw locked in frustration. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not in his own courtroom. Karoline Leavitt didn't move. She had made her point, and now she watched as the most powerful man in the room, a judge who had spent decades controlling outcomes, squirmed under the weight of his own arrogance. It was a small victory, but she knew better than to celebrate too soon. Calloway exhaled sharply, tapping his gavel once. "We will take a short recess before proceeding." And just like that, he stood and walked out. But Karoline saw it. She saw the way his shoulders stiffened as he turned his back on her. He wasn't dismissing the case. Not yet. And that meant one thing. She had gotten to him. Karoline didn't waste a second. As soon as Calloway left the bench, she turned to her attorney, Daniel Brooks. "He's stalling," she said. "He knows dismissing the case outright would be a disaster." Brooks nodded. "You put him in a tough spot. He can't just shut this down without making it look obvious." Karoline glanced toward the opposing counsel, who were whispering among themselves, throwing nervous glances in her direction. They had been so sure this would be over before it even started. Now, they weren't so sure anymore. Karoline leaned in. "I want to know exactly who is pulling his strings. Get me everything on Calloway, past rulings, political donations, conflicts of interest." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "You think someone's pressuring him?" Karoline's smirk was ice cold. "I don't think," she said. "I know." While Karoline and her team worked behind the scenes, Judge Calloway sat in his chambers, rubbing his temples. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. He had shut down cases like this before, buried them in legal loopholes, dismissed them before they could ever make waves. But Karoline, she was dangerous. Not because she was breaking the law, but because she knew how the game was played. And worse, she wasn't afraid to fight back. His phone rang. Calloway hesitated before answering. A cold voice spoke from the other end. "You need to handle this. Now." Calloway exhaled. "I tried, but she put me in a position where—" "I don't care," the voice snapped. "Do what you were put there to do." The line went dead. Calloway stared at his phone for a long moment before shoving it back into his desk drawer. Then he made his decision. When court resumed, Calloway walked back in with confidence. Karoline could see it in his eyes. He had decided on his next move, and she knew it wasn't going to be fair. The judge took his seat, adjusted his robe, and cleared his throat. After reviewing the preliminary arguments, he began, "This court has determined that there are legal deficiencies in the plaintiff's filing. As such, I am ruling that—" Karoline stood. She wasn't going to let him finish. "Your Honor," she said, her voice sharp, "if this case is being dismissed due to a deficiency, I request that we be given an opportunity to amend and refile." Calloway's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected that, and Karoline knew why. Because the only reason to deny that request was if he had already decided to shut this down completely, with or without legal justification. He leaned forward slightly, trying to reassert control. "This court does not exist to provide a platform for baseless accusations, Ms. Leavitt." Karoline's smirk was razor sharp. "And yet, Your Honor, I have a signed affidavit from a whistleblower within the contracting office, one that outlines exactly how these deals were rigged." The room shifted. Even the defense attorneys went rigid. She had just exposed something they weren't expecting. Calloway's face twitched. Karoline pulled a thick envelope from her briefcase and handed it to Brooks, who promptly passed it to the court clerk. I ask that this be submitted into evidence, she said smoothly. Unless, of course, the court is willing to deny a sworn affidavit from a federal employee. Calloway was trapped. If he refused to allow the evidence, it would make headlines. If he accepted it, it would keep the case alive. Karoline could see it happening in real time. The calculations behind his eyes, the mental gymnastics of a judge who thought he had absolute power, now forced into a position where he had none. And then, it happened. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. This court will review the submission and schedule a follow-up hearing. Karoline's victory was silent, but absolute. She had won the first battle. But this wasn't over yet, because now she had proof, and Calloway had no idea what was coming next. By the next morning, the whistleblower's affidavit was leaked to the press. The details were damning. Emails, documents, even recordings, all exposing the corruption Karoline had been fighting against. But the most shocking part? Judge Calloway's name was all over them. It turned out he wasn't just biased, he was involved. The contract in question? It had connections to his own family's law firm. By noon, multiple ethics complaints had been filed. By evening, reporters were camped outside the courthouse, demanding answers. And by the following week, Judge Calloway had been removed from the case. Karoline walked back into that same courtroom, her heels clicking against the floor, with the same confidence she had the first time. Only this time, Calloway's chair was empty. A new judge sat in his place. And this time, justice was going to be served. She had fought back, and she had won. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below.